I'd like to maybe quickly do a kind of an introduction in the sense that Leonard and I have been talking about what can be done a little bit in the pandemic situation we find ourselves. And the question did come up again and again, what next? What next for his wonderful publishing next conference? What next for Galf? What next for all of us as writers? So I'd like to come back to that question as well with Annie. But we also, thinking about what has been going on for the last year or two, certainly the last year intensely, with the effect in Goa, but also all other parts of the country, to some extent the world. We wanted to talk about questions of identity, and what is going to happen to us next? How are we going to feel next? And that the idea of this theme really coalesced when I got my hands on Annie's lovely book. So this is a very unusual book. Annie, in my own introduction, if you like, post Leonard's, Annie is a very unusual writer in the sense that I don't think there's a single genre that exists that she has not tackled and actually done it at quite a high standard. She's written plays. She's written short stories. She's written novels. She is a prolific journalist. She's done a fantastic anthology on women's writing. I think she's also translated, isn't that quite possibly she's a translator? But this book is something unique. I've read a number of those books. Some of them have been showcased at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival. But this book was something quite unique, and I fell into it with great delight and also wonder. I think it's a fantastic achievement, Annie. And there are many things I particularly loved about it. And it's just right for this conversation, and to kick off this series. So congratulations on that. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I do think this book is available online, free, I think. But I do urge you to get this very lovely edition, which contains, and I think that is in a way it's added tremendous delight to my own reading, my own perception of it. Contains beautiful drawings by Annie's mother, and they are based on the text, but since she's lived some of these experiences, the drawings add a lot of texture and are very lovely. Annie, first I'd like to ask you a little bit about how this book came about. I think I was thinking about it today, so I did something. This is another aside in a way, but I took your book with me to my own little patch in the world where I had already read it, but I happened to be there, and so I was flipping through it, and I was wondering whether a book like this could have been, if you had approached a publisher, a mainstream publisher, and in India, or a mainstream publisher in India had spoken to you about writing a book, whether this kind of book would have come into existence. I suspect not, perhaps. So this book came into existence in a very unique way, which is via the anonymously assessed 9 Dots Prize. Could you explain a little bit about that first?
First of all, Vivek, thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and thank you, Leo, also. Um, about the I'll begin by just saying something about the 9 Dots Prize. I heard about it the year before. So, say somewhere around this time of the year in 2018, a friend of mine sent me a link saying that, hey, there's this new prize and you might want to enter it. And I, being a freelance writer, I'm always looking for opportunities. So for the last 10 years, I've just somehow managed to get by on my writing, which if anybody who's a full-time writer knows it's really, really difficult. And I was really struggling at the time. I was entering every fund, every grant, every prize I could. And the important thing about the 9 Dots Prize also is that it's free entry. A lot of prizes have a sort of price tag attached, so they're open to anyone all over the world, but sometimes the entry is $35, sometimes it's $50, and that obviously means that you can't enter a lot of these, especially from people from third world countries can't do it. So the 9 Dots Prize was free to enter, but it did have certain restrictions. So the first thing about the prize is that it is not a literary prize. It is a prize for a book, yes, to produce a book, yes, but the main thing about it is that it poses a question, and the question is of global significance. And it encourages people, researchers, thinkers, writers, anybody really, to come up with a response that is meaningful and which will have resonance for readers everywhere. Um, so, in my year, the question was of home. The question was the year that I entered the prize. The question was, can we still say that there's no place like home? And the question immediately spoke to me because home, belonging, identity is something that I had been thinking about in a limited way, writing about also for the last 10, 15 years. But I'd been writing in fits and starts. It was only in the last 2 or 3 years that the question became immediate and urgent for me too, for me personally, for many people, I think, in this part of the world, not just India, South Asia, I would say. And I wanted to think a little bit harder about this question. What does it mean to me? So I thought that sooner or later I'm going to write something about this, and this is a good opportunity for me to try and structure my thoughts. So the way the Nine Dots Prize works is that you have to write a 3,000-word essay, which I wrote, um, and you write a book plan. You have to come up with a list of the themes, the topics, the chapters, how you're going to construct a sort of roadmap to the book. So I did that too, and and well, I think the essay somehow worked with this particular jury, and they liked it, and they liked the ideas that I wanted to explore. So I was lucky in that. I think a lot of it is also about luck, because finally it comes down to the people who are sitting on the jury. And in my case, it was mainly journalists, academics, a combination of academics and, I think, commentators, thinkers, etc. I approached this book partly as a journalist and partly as just a citizen who's trying to write a memoir. I am a bit young to be writing a memoir, but I do really love writing personal essays. For me, the personal essay is a theme, it's a way of writing that I think I do well in. I like to connect the personal to the civic and to the political and to the sort of larger social question, and to approach it through my own lens, a personal lens of identity, of history, of family, all of that. So I thought that this topic would be suited to memoir. I positioned and pitched it as a memoir, but with the understanding that I would approach it as a journalist, and that is what I did. The other part of your question, if I had just taken the book plan to a publisher, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a bit young to be writing a memoir, and typically with memoir, unless you've suffered some grave kind of, injury in life, usually publishers are not interested. Or if you're a very, very established writer at the end of your life, and then they might be interested in memoirs. So I think there might
Right.
have been a little bit of a reluctance. Journalism, they're always open to. If I position this as a book of journalism, then they would be much more open to it. I think
Right.
it's a pitching issue rather than. I mean, as a writer and journalist, you know this, that how you pitch a project is really important. So I would have pitched it differently if I was
That's true.
approaching a publisher.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I was actually telling my mother, right? So my mother is in her 70s, and I was telling my mother how I'd enjoyed this book, and I looked at it, and she has met you. She was like, "How can she write a memoir? You know, she's so young." That was kind of the initial impression, but I explained it. I suspect that you would not have been able to write this book in this. I mean, for whatever it's worth, this is my own take on it. I suspect you wouldn't have been able to. And what's really precious, what's really valuable, and the reason I urge everyone to read this book, and to read this book now, is it's the tenderness of the personal that you bring into it. You know, those very I think areas which have not appeared in other parts of your writing. So I wanted to actually, in a way, this is you, since you and I actually know each other, and we've had conversations before. I recall when I was reading this book, that you and I had a conversation which is seared in my memory. It was at one of those turns in Indian recent Indian history, and you and I were sitting at the Goa Arts and Literature Festival with Salil Tripathi. I don't know if you remember this, but we were sitting and we were talking about it, and what can we do? What are we doing now? And you said something then which struck me very, very powerfully, which is that you said there are a number of things I don't say, there are a number of things I can't say. I think you might have told me that I'm writing down things which I cannot say, which I don't say. But I was amazed, because in this book you've actually gone ahead and written them. I think a lot of those things have come out. Why is that? Is that first of all, is that true? Are these things that you would that in this form, in this given this particular project's kind of what should I say, contours, that it brought different aspects of your personal life, and actually which reveal a tremendous amount. They not just about your location in terms of being a minority in the country, but being about a young woman, about being a working woman, about someone who is trying to make an independent way in the world, in India. Um, there are many, many beautiful little things there, I think, which were certainly very, very interesting and a learning experience for me. Do you think that this is are these the things that you were holding back, that you didn't write before? And if you did write, if that's the case, what is it about this time and in this moment, in some ways more dangerous or more vitiated, certainly the atmosphere? What made them come out?
Well, some of these issues, yes, particularly the questions around citizenship, they were very troubling, and I was a little reluctant to talk about them publicly, partly because in a situation which is in a social atmosphere where talk of patriotism and nationalism is kind of it's almost sacrosanct. Whoever gets to monopolize the nationalistic discourse gets to also define what can or cannot be said. So um, even if you say that you are feeling afraid, to say that becomes a kind of act of betrayal, because that points then that there to the fact that there is something to be afraid of. um, so I was in 2018 around then quite nervous, and then somewhere at the start of end of last year, start of this year, I had put up a Facebook note declaring that I would no longer be afraid and I would struggle against my own fears, etc. I don't think that lasted, Vivek. It lasted my free and fearless
It's a tough
commentary
one. It's a
lasted,
tough
I
one,
think,
Annie.
about 3 months. Um,
Yeah, it's a tough one. I grapple with it myself, as you know. These are tough ones. It's a tough one. Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, I think it would be lovely if you could read something from the book. I didn't actually ask you to prepare one, but would you mind doing that? Do you have
Oh
your book in
gosh,
front of you?
okay.
Do you have your
I
book in
don't
front of
have
you?
it in, I don't, but if you give me 2 minutes, I can open it up as a PDF here. Just give me two
Okay.
minutes.
In the meanwhile, I will read out. Fine, please do that. Please choose one of the personal sections. I have some underlined, but you can choose your own.
Yeah,
I'll read out what I think Musharraf Faruqi, who's a friend of ours, who is in Lahore. Musharraf Faruqi has a very interesting blurb and a very perceptive blurb, I think. He says that Zaidi resets the perspectives from which we understand and remember the experience of home. With the same intuitiveness that permeates her sensitive fictions, she uses the personal to lay bare the new universality of home, redefining it as an unsettled, turbulent condition that we must continuously contend, negotiate, compromise with to our incremental loss, which is very beautiful. Do you have it in front of you, or shall I ask you another question?
uh, this is just the PDF is just taking a few seconds to open up. Just give
Okay.
me a few more seconds, or in the meantime, you can ask me another question. It'll open up.
Well, what I'd like to say is, over the course of the last the same 2 years, I think, since we had that conversation, the last 2 or 3 years, I've gotten used to thinking, and I just wrote about Hathras, right, in Uttar Pradesh, and I spent some time talking to people over there. I've gotten used to thinking of UP as a quite a benighted place. I mean, a place which is sinking and has been, becoming more and more irredeemable. But I was quite touched. I think in you kind of do a redemption for UP, and quite an interesting angle, which I think is which I think is quite lovely, because as you describe it, your own experiences there are complicated. You have roots there, of course, but your own, the way you are perceived, as well as the way things are playing out. It has been it's a complex picture. So, but I see at the end of the book is very much also about. I'd like to get to that a little bit about land. It's about, which is in India, is very much, and connection. I see at the end of the book you say that you have kind of chosen a place to put roots in, and that's Lucknow. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that bit, Vivek? I didn't quite hear it.
I think
The
at the
last two
end of your
sentences.
book. So the book is a bit about land, about finding a piece of patch that's yourself. And at the
Mm.
end of it, I think you say that it's Lucknow is a place where you are going to at least have.
Yeah,
When it came to deciding where, I did buy a tiny bit
yeah,
of land to call my own, not my mother's, not my father's, mine. When it came to deciding where, I chose Lucknow. So, you live in Bombay, and you've lived in other big cities. What is it
yeah.
about UP that kind of made it? What redeemed UP for you?
I don't think UP was redeemed for me. It was just that I accepted it, accepted the fact that I belonged to it, and that it belonged to me. Um, the thing is
Wow.
that places get bad, right? And the reasons they get bad are very complex. One of the things that I wanted to do through the writing of the book is also to try and figure this out. How is it that our family has roots in this place that has such a bad reputation, and yet I have not been touched by this violence at all? I mean, there's all this talk about UP being a failed state, etc. This is recent. But as I say in the book, my grandfather, and he's very much a UP man, very much a product of the culture he came from. He spent the large part, he did travel a lot all over the country, but the bulk of his life was spent in Uttar Pradesh. I haven't known a more gentle, a more erudite, a more liberal uh, individual, scholar, citizen, freedom fighter than him. But even he would say things like, whenever we talked about ancestral place, which is in Eastern UP, he would say that there are two things famous there. One is the Imarti and one is the Gundagardi. Now,
Right.
for him speaking about Gundagardi, for me that was a surprise. For my generation to speak of it is one thing because we read the newspaper reports, etc. He came from Eastern UP for generations. We have like 15 generations have been living there. He moved away from his village when he was hardly, I think, somewhere 12 or 13 years old. He left the village. So why does he have these memories? Why does he buy into the stereotype? Right? It's one thing for somebody outside UP to buy into the stereotype. Why was he buying into it? So that was the question I wanted to resolve in my own mind. And I think places are violent for a reason. When we say that a place is violent, like a whole state is violent, obviously the state cannot be violent, right? uh, Violence is a pact. It's a compact between the oppressor and the oppressed. It is a compact between the state and the citizenry. It is a compact also between people who may be oppressed today but will resist and will turn the violence back upon those people who have been violent towards them. It is all these different things. When we say violence, we ignore all of that. We just kind of, in our mind, it is just like this movie where just guns are going off and there's this blaze of guns, and it's like Gangs of Wasipur or whatever it is. And that happens very briefly. that is the culmination of everything else that is around it. But I also do believe that UP is India's most populous state. So if you look at the violence per se, you will find that it is high. If you look at the violence per capita, you will find it is also high. But the kind of violence that you have in mind when you think of Uttar Pradesh is not necessarily that high. Um, I mean, there's not guns going off at every street corner. There's more likely poetry going off at every street corner.
Right.
And I had to come to terms with that there is this, but there is also that. And most people I know are actually not only quite fine, but also quite gentle and entirely non-violent. So I think once I accepted that that this is in the air around me, but it's not me. It doesn't need to be me. It doesn't need to be part of my self-identification. For me, there is redemption in that for myself. UP doesn't need to be redeemed. I need to be redeemed.
Amazing. You really sound like a brand spokeswoman for UP, I have to say. I mean, that's the most poetic, I would say, defense or defensive construct for violence I've heard in my life. I mean, so that's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. But anyway, why don't you read something and then we'll trigger off to direct questions about the text.
Yeah, since we've been talking about UP, let me just read something from the UP section. Let me just
Okay.
read that.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to begin here where I'm starting to talk of Eastern UP, and there's a lot of talk of gangsters. And I list some of the gangsters. I'm not going to name all of them right now. Um, I'm going to go to this section where, after I've talked about the links between gangsters, the state, how the gangsters started entering politics, government contracts, all of that. After this section, it wasn't always like this. There was a time Azamgarh was a socialist stronghold. Azamgarh is traditionally where my family comes from. The district has now been bifurcated. Earlier, it was just this very large district called Azamgarh. Now, smaller districts have been carved out of it, and the district where my village is in Mau district now. But it's roughly the same area. Gorakhpur, Azamgarh, Mau, they're all kind of neighboring districts. And Azamgarh used to be known as a socialist stronghold. Local leaders raised slogans like "Ye azadi jhooti hai, desh ki janta bhukhi hai." Our freedom is a lie. The people are still hungry. In the 1980s, however, the political culture changed dramatically, and the reputation for poetry and textiles was replaced by a reputation for lawless men who had little to lose. Mumbai's mafia was partly to blame. The gangs were hiring freelance shooters, paying as little as 5,000 to 10,000 rupees, which is in US dollars, that's 70 to $140 for a hit job. These killings served as warnings through which millions could be extorted from potential victims. The young men who killed for such paltry sums often had no criminal records, and after the hit, they melted back into the landscape from where they had come. Some of them, however, were traced to Azamgarh, and this small town acquired a reputation for danger, rather than Mumbai, which was home to an underworld that has been described as a well oiled machine with an annual turnover several times the municipal budget. Goons and gangs, however, were not as damaging as the third round of stereotyping. This time it was linked to terror, a word deployed with terrifying precision for terrifying ends. Azamgarh has had few moments of communal tension. Uh, Actually, Azamgarh is not known for communal violence. Eastern UP has been relatively peaceful as far as intercommunal harmony is concerned, except very briefly during the 92 demolition of the Babri Masjid, etc., 91, 92. Except for that, there's been very little tension in this particular area. Um, However, a narrative has been drummed up that seeks to isolate and demonize Muslims ever since a mob led by Hindutva organizations demolished the Babri Masjid in 1992, followed by riots and bomb attacks. In subsequent years, The Students' Islamic Movement of India was banned under anti-terror laws, and amongst its office bearers were men who had origins in Azamgarh. The narrative around Azamgarh grew wings in 2008. After a series of bomb blasts in Delhi, the police claimed that suspects were hiding in a place called Batla House. Police killed two young men, both from Azamgarh, arrested a third, and claimed that two others escaped. Concerted efforts have since been made to paint the whole district with the brush of terror. These are really efforts to reconfigure a political constituency that has traditionally voted center or left. I'll stop here. I mean, this is uh, broadly some of the things that have happened in UP. Um, Over and over again in political speeches, mainstream politicians have spoken about Azamgarh as a hub of terror. And people have been picked up. Now, this is a bit of a chicken and egg situation. You pick up people who have roots from this place. You don't have any evidence against them, or you kill them before you can prove anything. And then you say that this is a hub of terror. It isn't a hub of terror. It is most definitely not a hub of terror. It has been a socialist past. It has a socialist past. It is a very poor area. It is a backward area. It has its problems, but it's traditionally actually voted left of center or for Samajwadi or other organizations. Um, it has its problems, but there is also a concerted effort to divide people here, sometimes in the name of violence, sometimes in the name of caste, sometimes in the name of religion. And I think that is the thing that really troubles me. That people aren't even trying to fix the problems of this place where my family comes from. As a journalist, I had gone to Azamgarh only once, um, after Abu Salem was arrested, and he has roots in this area. So I had gone there once just to provide some inputs into a story. Um, that was the first time that I went not to visit my family, not for personal reasons, but for professional reasons. And I began to talk to the people there. Nobody has done much to actually create any industry in this place. And if you look at the gazettes, the imperial gazettes from the last century, for over 100 years, nobody has invested in this region. It's mainly a very feudal place. It continues to remain a deeply feudal place. The stranglehold of caste is obviously very strong. Any attempts at organizations of farmers, organizations of workers, the textile workers, have been crushed quite brutally, very swiftly. They aren't really allowed to grow too big or too powerful. And and so when people are that poor, what do? If you cannot assure 2 square meals for yourself, if your own life feels like it's worthless, if your life feels like it's cheap, it doesn't take a lot of convincing for somebody to call you to Bombay, say, here's 10,000 rupees, go kill a stranger. You do it, you take the money, you go back home. Uh, how much violence there is in that? What part of this is violence? Um, I think that is the question that I am more interested in. What can persuade somebody to do things like that? Not the fact that people do things like that, but the fact that people can so easily be tempted to do something like this. Why do they not struggle against the choice like you and I would?
Well, this goes into your, well, privilege is one reason, but this goes into your book, Prelude to a Riot, right? You explore some of these themes and ideas. Um, that's one aspect of the book. I described UP not facetiously at all as seeming like a benighted place. And this part of the book where you look into it journalistically as to what exactly has happened, analytically what has happened, is quite chilling. And I must say that there are resonances even to a place which is vastly different on the Arabian Sea, like Goa. There are some resonant. There is quite a lot of resonance there. Less in terms of, I mean, Goa is obviously wealthy and relatively well educated, but it suffers from some of the same political, what should I say, stratagems that are being applied here. And one of those has to do with this idea of fluidity, cultural fluidity. There are many sections in your book where you talk about how Uttar Pradesh has traditionally been like that. And you say, for instance, that culture is a slippery, fluid thing, but powerful elites like to bolt everyone down in their respective positions. And and this is something that's also a recurring theme in the book when it comes to your own identity. I think it seems that the natural complexity of the South Asian kind of way of life is being hammered into extremes by a number of forces, including economics, but certainly by political strategy. Is this something that I mean, and it's obviously playing out in Uttar Pradesh, right? Well, what do you think is going to be the future for this? I mean, for let's look at Uttar Pradesh for another question, if you like, with in the context that it is now, with Ajay Bisht or Yogi Adityanath as the chief minister. I spoke to a number of people from recently when I was writing about Hathras, and the situation is getting just significantly worse when it comes to both caste as well as religion, and the state is effectively seems to be running rampant in this area. Is this something you can that is there a better way forward? What next, Annie, in this scenario? What could happen that's positive?
I am not sure I know how to answer that, Vivek. I don't know what could happen. I think one of the things that happens, and this is more of a psychology issue, I think, than a sociology issue. Um, People get used to being treated badly. They say this about human beings, that there's almost nothing that they don't get used to. If people have been kind of ground into a kind of listlessness, a kind of haplessness, a kind of feeling that, yeah, but it's always been like this and it's not really going to change. Um, it takes that much more to kind of shake them up and ask them to demand accountability. I think democracy, in the true sense, hasn't really reached people's souls, because around me, and I say this myself being complicit, it wasn't until I became a journalist and started to think about these things in a broader way. I had to be taught to think like this. I didn't organically start thinking like this. Um, where you start to think upon government money as your money. It is our money. That power is our power. It's not theirs to give, it's ours to take and to demand. But I didn't grow up thinking like this. I grew up thinking like most other people, that if the government does something for you, it's doing you a favor. If somebody does in power is doing something for you, then that means that they're for you. uh, I didn't even have the sense to think about this, to kind of know, to question what right do they have to not do something for me. They don't have that right. It is their job. They don't do it, they should get out of the way, let someone else do it. That's what democracy is, right? um, but I think that a true sense of democracy slips very far back into the back of our heads, and partly it's because we've never really experienced it. If you've never experienced a good system, you don't know what that looks like. And I think for large parts of our country, UP particularly, I would say, for many people, it's hard for them to imagine a non-feudal setup. For example, it doesn't even strike them that things could be different, or they see that the struggle will be so hard, so long, so bloody. There will be violence involved, because obviously there are power equations here. Nothing comes, nobody gives up power very easily. We see that. A lot of these caste conflicts are about that. So I think people are obviously reluctant. I mean, the larger picture is obviously that everyone must pull together and everybody must work towards a better system. But when it comes down to the individual decision, as an individual to sacrifice something, that's hard. It's hard. I don't know how many people are willing to do it.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Zooming. One of the interesting things about your book, Annie, is that you zoom from the national level to the personal, and also it's not only about your own sense of identity and belonging, because it explores different, as Musharraf points out, it explores different peoples as well. I particularly like the beginning. I have not read anything really that has been set in the kind of setting that you described, which is I guess it's an industrial colony, right? An industrial colony in Rajasthan, where you grew up. And I think what was interesting is you didn't just go back and look at your own childhood memories and try to understand what you felt like, but you went and you spent some time figuring out the indigenous people's role in the political economy that has arisen and developed over the course of the last, I guess, 40 years or so, or 35 years. Um, was that difficult for you to go back? I mean, as a journalist was it difficult, but also it must have been quite an eye opener to understand all these ramifications that took place around your childhood world. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this place where I grew up, it was an industrial township. There was a cement factory. And then later we moved to another place which was also an industrial township. First it was a cement factory and then it was a tire factory. Um, the cement township, I moved when I was very little. I was, I think, somewhere between 5 and 6 years old when we moved. And I didn't really think of it as anything very special or anything very different. It was only about a few years ago, I think about 10 years ago maybe, I met another writer and he said, "So what's your story? Tell me." So I began to say, "This is where I come from. I come from this really small place. I grew up in this really small place. I have no great attachment to it, etc." And he said, "This is so fascinating. Why don't you write about it?" And I said, "Really? What's so fascinating about it? I have nothing to tell. There was nothing there." And he said, "That's what's interesting about it, that there was nothing there. And that you felt trapped there, that is interesting." And then I began to think about it and I said, "Yeah, actually, it is interesting. Why didn't I think of, I suppose, wherever you grow up, you take it, you just, it's just what it is. You don't reflect upon it very much." However, as a journalist, I had learned to reflect upon the rights of people, indigenous tribes, mineral rights, things like that. So when I decided to write about my struggles at belonging, where do I belong? Why is it so difficult to belong to places like this? I mean, I had not one single relative in that entire state where I grew up. If uh, if God forbid something went wrong with our family, the people we knew were like almost 1,000 kilometers away. We had no way of reaching them. We didn't have our own telephone lines. We had to go through the system. If you wanted to leave the colony, you had to go through the people who own this place, who run this place. They gave you your cars if you needed them, but you had to ask them. You had to ask for everything, and you needed permission to enter the colony because it was obviously gated and that kind of thing. So I thought about all these things and I began to think about what was here before. This when I grew up there, there was this, the only history that was associated with the place was the history of the township. But it obviously wasn't new. The land had always been there. There must have been people who lived there. And I saw the tribes come and go as workers. They would come and go uh, as casual labor in the colony. They didn't live there. So I began to think about them. Where do they come from? Where did they go? What happened to them? And then I decided to look at my childhood against the backdrop of the people who were there before. And also, I find it really interesting because in India particularly, and I think other parts of the world as well, the rights of indigenous people is it's such a, it's a bit of a hot potato, because when we say Adivasi, when we say indigenous people, we acknowledge on the one hand that these were people who were there before, and therefore they have some kind of primary claim to the land. If anyone has any claim on the land, by dint of the fact that they were there first, then by rights it is theirs. And yet in every nation, in every culture, the indigenous groups are paradoxically the ones that have the least rights. In practical terms, they have the least rights. So I was also interested in that how is it that despite a general kind of cultural acknowledgement that you have a certain primary right, at the same time, you also are the first people to lose that right. How does that happen? So I wanted to explore that through writing
It was
this
super.
particular section.
I thought that was super interesting. As you point out, I mean, there are countries which are some nativist type countries where indigenous peoples have are in the political majority, which have become where, but there are very few countries. You're right, particularly not countries like ours where indigenous people are acknowledged. They almost never show up in a book which a narrative like this. So I thought that was quite lovely. As it happens, and it's so wonderful what you just said. It related me to something I just heard on the internet yesterday. I think one of some government organization has found a bunch of speeches from the Constituent Assembly in 1946 and is putting them out on YouTube. And I was stunned. I literally got goosebumps by I think Jaipal Singh Munda. I think that's his name. Jaipal Singh Munda was one of the writers of the Constitution. He was in the Constituent Assembly, and he had this wonderful line. He said, "Like I'm all for." I'm going to paraphrase, and I can't even speak as well as he does. He has a lovely kind of way of speaking, but he says quite clipped British style accent, British Indian accent, and he says something like, "I'm all for quit India," and once the colonials quit India, I hope all the others, all the others who came afterwards also quit India because and leave it to the Aboriginals because we belong. This is our country, which is such a hysterically it's wry, but it's also totally completely apt, and it's a sentiment we never hear in our political mix, which is that everyone else who came after the Aboriginals is also in a way owes a
And it
debt
was
at the very least, and that yeah, go ahead.
it was really interesting that when all these debates about the constitution were going on, and you're right, there were all these questions coming up about who has the right to what. Really interesting that none
Right.
of the Adivasi languages were included in the scheduled languages. The Munda
Yeah,
language, the
that's in your
Brownies
book.
language. Yeah, yeah.
You're
So I
absolutely
found
right.
that
That's in
really
your book,
interesting.
and I think yeah, I think basically, I mean, the founding fathers made many wise decisions, and there were reasons to make certain decisions, and perhaps India would not exist, certainly not in the form that we have, if they had not made them. But there were many decisions which simplified or glossed over, and trampled on the rights of huge numbers of people in the country. And I think that is something that we have to, when we think about the rest of the 21st century, when we think about the post-pandemic era, when we think about what's coming next, these questions have to be arisen. How is the society, uh, can the society be more inclusive? Because these people are not only going nowhere, but we are all increasingly tied together in ways that didn't exist for decades. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, to purchase a signed copy of Annie's book, and I really urge you to do so. It's one of the best books I think I've read on being alive at this time, and particularly on being an Indian. Please try and buy the book. And there's a wonderful opportunity that Leonard and the publisher are offering, that you can buy a signed copy, which you by using the link which you will see on the right. And also, if you have any questions, we've been speaking for about 50 minutes. If you have any questions, please share those questions also on the link on the right. Annie, Annie, in terms of this book, which zooms through the political, it zooms through. It also becomes very personal, and the sections which I really enjoyed. In some ways, it reminded me a little bit of Amrita Patil's Kari. Also, it's about you have sections about being a working woman trying to and self-reliant working woman living in Bombay, and then also some of the issues you had, and you also have a quite very interesting section, I think, called Outsiders at Home, about um, being growing up a woman in India. This particular section, um, doesn't seem to be fully resolved to me. I mean, it doesn't come out at the end where you say Annie's figured it out, and this is where she is. Is this still an issue for you? I mean, is this something that you continue to grapple with? You've come to peace with so many things. You've come to peace with Uttar Pradesh, with all its complications. But this particular issue, you ask at the very end of this chapter quite poignantly. I can tell when your mother asked you about your own home, your putative home when you set up your own household. I can tell her that she'll be welcome in my home, but how can I guarantee her welcome in a home in which I'm uncertain of my own place? This seems, and you point out you're part of the 5%, and you have a tremendous amount of wherewithal. I mean, cultural, personal, psychological wherewithal, but this idea of negotiating this place, is this an irresolvable issue? What should I know about this, that I should understand? What should I understand better about this situation?
Well, I think one of the problems in India is that there is a lot of assumption on the part of both men and women that the movement, the actual shift that will happen from the side of the woman. And by that, it's not just the physical shift. It's not just that she will leave her house to move into your house. The shift is also psychological. The shift is also the shift of her wealth. The shift is also in the sense of how family dynamics works, where she's the only one in that household that hasn't always been there, and whose right to be there is not unshakable. She can be turned out if she says, I don't feel like I belong. It's very easy for somebody to turn around and say, okay, leave. um, in cultures where both people leave their houses or they move into a neutral territory, there is a certain negotiation that happens. Uh, Maybe, perhaps it is still women who do a lot of the emotional labor, etc. But just by virtue of the fact that a woman is not moving into an already existing cohort, with deeply entrenched relationships and existing family dynamics, it gives her a little breathing room. If you move into a household where everybody is already sort of established and you're the only outsider, then you have to fight doubly, triply hard to find your place there and to make yourself belong there, and to let everybody else know that it is not negotiable. Your place there is not negotiable. Um, these are dynamics, and I think that won't change until our culture, and by that I mean Indian culture in general, like mainstream culture, um, starts to acknowledge that children are not property. By and large, sons particularly, actually more than daughters, people tend to think of sons as property and as investment in a future. So they don't let go of sons very easily. And there is this suspicion towards women, uh, wives, as somebody who will take the son away from the natal unit, etc. So there's a lot of psychological and emotional harm that happens along the way on every side. So I think you have to, and this is also a big part of the reason why we have honor killings and things like that, because you think of children as something that you own and that you have rights over. You don't actually. You don't. They may have some familial responsibilities towards you, uh, but neither do children have the right to expect that they will inherit everything you have, nor do you have the right to treat them like property. Things will only change when we snap out of this way of thinking. Unfortunately, in India, I don't think that has changed much. By and large, it hasn't changed.
True, it's very entrenched. It's certainly prevalent all around me, and as you know, I have three boys, and we deal with this baggage all the time. Annie, Girish has a wonderful question. We haven't actually delved into it, but I was struck by these sections in your book. Girish's question is: your name is associated with the Shia elite, including the intellectual elite. Has your Shia identity been relevant to you, and has it been explored in the book, which I apologize for not having yet read? Please answer the question, Girish. Thank you, Girish, for that excellent question.
Yeah. Um, the book touches a little bit on this part of the question, Girish. I touch upon a little less on the Shia part of it, but definitely on the elite part of it, I do, because it's not just Shia, it's Shia Sayyid. The street where there's a section I write about where last year for the first time I started to leave our ancestral house without an escort, without being chaperoned out, and without the parda, etc., and on my own, not in a car but in public transport. This is the first time, and I think it might also be the first time anyone in the family has done that. So there was a lot of disapproval also. Nobody stopped me, but they said, "How will you go?" I said, "I'll go." They said, "Okay, wait." So they summoned a cycle rickshaw to the door of the household, which is how it's always been done. Uh, some vehicle is summoned to the door of the house, and the women then go, usually not alone. Um, and then they very rarely use public transport unless they absolutely have to. A student might, for example, but somebody like me who has no real urgent need to be out of the house wouldn't go. At least up until this generation, they wouldn't go. Now things are changing a little bit. So I went. I went out. I regretted going out. It was very difficult getting around. Um, I managed to somehow squeeze into a tempo. It's a modified auto rickshaw that is meant to seat 3 people, max 4 people. It ends up seating 16 people. I was sandwiched between 2 women, and they really, and by sandwiched I mean really sandwiched. The roads were so bad. The auto was shaking so badly that if I was not so tightly packed between these women, I would have just been hurled completely out of the auto rickshaw. It was that bad. It took ages to cover 3 kilometers, 30 kilometers. It took me, I think, 3.5 hours to cover 30 kilometers, changing from a cycle rickshaw to auto rickshaw to a bus. And then finally, somebody had to come in a car to pick me up for the last leg of it because I managed to twist my ankle along the way. It was quite a journey. The interesting thing there was that now the street where we live, where my family is, it's the area is called Sayyadwara. In our village, it's called Sayyadwara. Um, I was sitting in the rickshaw and there was this old woman sitting next to me. She was talking in Bhojpuri. Everybody was talking in Bhojpuri, which I do not understand, obviously. And it's a very particular dialect of Bhojpuri. It's a strong rustic dialect. So even if you are an urban Bhojpuri speaker, you would struggle with that particular dialect a little bit. They were talking to each other. I was the only person who did not understand Bhojpuri, obviously, in that overcrowded vehicle. And this, at some point in the journey, this old woman, she turns to me and she starts to strike up a conversation. So I'm listening and nodding, but I don't understand what she's saying. And at some point, she figures out that this girl is not understanding anything, and she asks me something, and I caught the word ghar. So I understood she's asking me, "Where is your house? Where are you from?" So in Hindi, I answered that I'm from here. And she says, in Bhojpuri, she kind of looked weirdly, and I said, "Here," meaning from Mohammadabad is the name of the village. So I said, "I'm from Mohammadabad." And then she just looks at me for 5 seconds and she says, "You're from Sayyadwara." Uh, and initially I was like, "How does she know?" But within a few seconds, my mind also put all these connections together, and I knew, of course, she knows. It's written all over me. My manners, the fact that I dress a certain way, I look a certain way. Power is deeply entrenched. You're right. The elite power, and this is more to do with caste than it is to do with uh, Shia or Sunni identity. Not only do the family traditionally, not only do they not marry outside the sect, they also traditionally marry only other Shias. Uh, like the Sayyids typically tend to marry within the Sayyid clan, and this is something that I was not taught to. Not only was I taught not to question, I also grew up not really thinking of caste within uh, is Indian Muslims as a whole, not just Shias, Indian Muslims as a whole. I didn't think about it, and I wasn't taught to think about it. The word caste was never uttered in our household. Um, and of course, if you ask someone, they would say, no, no, of course, in Islam, there is no caste. But the fact is that there is. Whenever you look at endogamy and exogamy, it's a sure sign that there is caste there. And through the course of the book, I examined some of that. I went and talked to a few people from the region, and they gave me some insights into this. And it's a fact. I talked to a few other people, and people who are non-Sayyads will talk about this. So the this there are politicians, for example. I haven't quoted this man, but I interviewed this person, and he said that there are Muslim politicians in eastern UP who will go around saying that I'm a Rajput Muslim. Their vote bank is Rajput. It is not Shia or Sunni Muslim. It is Rajput Muslim. So that's the way it works. The elite obviously hang on to power. There's no doubt about it. My grandfather tried to snap out of it. Yeah.
There are several. I mean, the book kind of is, in a way, your book is bookended by graves, right? There's epitaphs, and there are several places where your references to your Shia identity do come out in a way to answer Girish, though it's not an overwhelming thing. I also appreciate the fact that you talked about Savarna Muslims, right? You talked about caste in Islam, though you only referred to it in glancing, which is very much the case here. So a lot of these things have a lot of resonance here in another part of the country with a different kind of caste. I actually told my children that story from your book about the rickshaw, where a woman, just by looking at you, I mean, probably she knew. She didn't have to even look at you, probably. Just the fact that you were who you were and going around without a veil in that context, as though on a lark, and you were going to the library and typically, what should I say, writerly fashion, identified you. And something similar happened to my brother in on the island where we were today, where at a very distant corner of the island, someone saw him dressed in the clothes that he was, and he was like, "You must come from that house," right? So they figured it out right away. And of course, caste is highly prevalent. Caste is highly prevalent in our community, which ostensibly was converted 400 years ago, 500 years ago, to a religion without caste. So, yeah, powerful stuff there. Um, I wonder if we should. I should actually. Again, I'm going to hold up the book and say, please buy a copy. But I'd like to now go a little bit away from the book, and this is an experiment. It's the first one, Annie. So you're kind of a guinea pig, and I want to talk to you about the pandemic a little bit, right? So, just a question or two before we end, which is, first of all, where have you been? Have you been largely in lockdown? Are you more or less quarantined the last 7 months or so?
Completely, since mid-March, almost completely. I step out once a week on an average, for essentials, and only for essentials. Um, and I was getting impatient at one point, thinking that that enough is enough. But then every time I step out of the house, I get really scared because nobody's wearing masks anymore. Nobody.
You're in
I
Bombay,
stepped in.
right? Are you in Bombay?
Yes, I'm sort of on the fringes of Bombay, and people in banks are not wearing masks. I don't know why they're not frightened. They should be, but nobody is wearing masks anymore. So it also makes
Right.
unlocking yourself that much harder, because uh, if everybody was careful, you'd have a higher chance of survival. That's not happening.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we keep on seeing. I continually. Goa's had, I think, 40,000 odd cases, and we've had maybe 60,000. Was a tiny state, as you know, and there's some almost 600 deaths. And I keep looking enviously at countries like Vietnam and Taiwan, where almost, they've had 5 and 6 deaths, and or New Zealand, and countries which have really managed to handle it. And unfortunately, it's not working out terribly well in India, and possibly it will not. It might even get worse for the time being. What is on your agenda in terms of writing? Are you working on another book? What is the are you
Yeah.
superstitious about talking about it?
Um, I am superstitious, but I'm not working on a book, so I can talk about it. I I actually already had one draft of a really short, sort of interconnected kind of. You could say it's sort of like a novel. Again, again, different stories adding up to a kind of novel. I already had that written down, so I'm kind of feeling rather uh, self-satisfied because I have something to work on, and I can pretend to be busy, but that's something I will polish, redraft, etc. In the new year. Also, I have been busy though teaching. I now teach at the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication. So the semester has been
Wow.
entirely online, and I have been working from home teaching. These are undergraduates, so it's challenging doing this online, but at the same time, it, you know, when you teach, you also learn a lot. You learn to engage with both craft and ideas in journalism, what's happening, how to um, how to give students what you have, and also how to learn with them. That's been keeping me busy for the last few months.
Did you study journalism yourself?
I studied at the Xavier Institute of Communication. I did a PG
Right.
diploma here in Bombay, and
Okay.
had some very fine teachers there.
Nice. Um,
Girish, in
I
fact,
want
came in
to.
for a guest lecture once.
All right. Excellent. Um, I looked up the Nine Dots website, and they have a question for people who might be interested in applying this year. And the question for 2021 is, what does it mean to be young in an aging world? Which I think is a very important question, and particularly now, with inequalities growing that the way they are. Thanks very much, Annie. Is there something else that you would like to say? Is there some encouraging message for what's next? I mean, it's a question which looms a lot. What are you looking forward to post pandemic? Is there something specific?
Well, with regard to the question of the Nandos Prize, I would encourage people to apply, especially if they have a specific and unique way of thinking about this question. I would encourage you to apply. If you're a researcher in any of the fields that might be linked to the topic, please apply. It's a really cool prize, I think, in the sense that the people who drive it, who administer it, are very open to any sort of thing. It's judged anonymously, so you're not being judged on the basis of where you're coming from or anything. Um, Also, I think that that it's good to have a global prize, you know, where everybody all over the world is thinking about questions that will impact all of humanity. So for those reasons, I would encourage everybody to apply. And apart from that, the only thing I can say is that wear your masks, and be kind to each other. I think one thing that the pandemic has taught all of us is patience, learning to be patient with each other at home, trying to just be nice to people. Some of us saw how much suffering there was in the early months of the lockdown, and people better and braver than me have done much, much more, anything that they could for others. I think the economic hit that we've taken is going to be quite severe. So we've all got to do what we can with each other and for each other. I'm going to try to the extent that I can, and I would urge everybody to do the same.
Thank you. That's lovely, and I appreciate that. I would like you to please pass my specific compliments to your mother for her work in this. I think she did a great job with the illustrations. I would love to see a graphic novel kind of thing because the images are very narrative, right? In fact, that's one genre you've not actually tackled. I mean, in the midst in the multitude of genres in which you've mastered, graphic novel isn't one. So you should consider that actually, because I could see a lot of the stories actually embedded in her images, and they're really quite lovely. So congratulations to her, and thank you very much for this talk. Thank you, Leonard, for hosting us. There will be another one next week as well. And I really appreciate you kicking us off. It couldn't have been a better book. Oh, I should tell you today, I was on the island, as I keep saying, and I saw these, and I wish I could give them to you, but this is something you've demanded every time you come to Goa, which is
Is that
those.
those? Oh,
Yes, it
I've been
is.
thinking of it and missing it.
So
I
it,
need my
well,
annual supply.
I will eat it in your name. Um, which is the best I can do. Sorry to dangle it like this, but maybe I should bring it a little closer. So,
Well, I will
but
come to Goa and get it.
you should. Post-pandemic, everyone's invited to Goa and the Literature Festival, and we hope we'll do it again. Okay, thanks a lot, Leonard. Do you want to say something? Or are we done?
No, I just want to thank both you and Annie for this wonderful
Please go
conversation.
ahead.
And thanks a lot. I mean, and thank you for everybody who joined us.
Can't hear you, Leonard.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Little.
Yeah. Yeah. Just want to thank Vivek, thank Annie. Lovely conversation. Many points needed to be elaborated, and it was done that way. Also, I want to thank people who joined the conversation. And there's a link for Annie's book in case somebody might be interested. And we've asked Annie to sign copies if there are requests for them. And on that note, I think will stop. Um, and thank
Thank
you.
you, Leonard. Go ahead. Buy the book. It's an absolutely wonderful book. It's one of the best, most enjoyable and meaningful. I read a number of books constantly, but this is one of the most enjoyable and meaningful books I've read in a long time. Congratulations for writing it, Annie. I'm sure it wasn't easy to put yourself out there in the way that you have, but it's really worthwhile, and I'm so glad you did it. It's a very meaningful book, and I'm going to be giving it to a lot of people as well. And keep it up. You've done a
Thank you
fantastic.
so much, Vivek. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, everyone else. Thanks for
Congratulations.
showing up and listening.
Bye.